This MLB offseason has been crazy so far, and I had the opportunity to speak with Peter Appel from Just Baseball Media about everything that's been going on in this episode of Iggy Sports Talk.
Hold up, wait until the whole team show up. Yeah, I'm in Neverland.
Welcome back into Iggy Sports Talk. I'm your host, Jakey Nazuski, or Iggy for short. And man, so much in the MLB offseason has happened so far. Shohei Ohtani has gone to the Dodgers, Juan Soto to the Yankees, and so much more. But there's also a lot more moves that could happen before the season begins. And I had the opportunity to speak with the co-founder of Just Baseball Media, Peter Appel, about all the moves that have happened so far and also predicting what could happen prior to the 2024 season. And without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Peter. So, Peter, how have you been enjoying the MLB offseason so far, man?
I'm enjoying it. It's been busy, but busy is good. Shohei Ohtani, $700 million contract. That was pretty cool. We got a couple of trade rumors, but just a lot of content on our side. But overall, the offseason is a breath of fresh air, but I want the season to start.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, there's always that time when the players start signing and you start getting those hypotheticals in your minds for different teams and you start imagining what the season for different teams and different players could ultimately look like. And it's sort of a weird feeling, especially at this time of the MLB offseason, like right before the new year turns over, where you're sort of just waiting for things to fully pick up, because as it is different from the NBA, NFL, where those happen in just like a few weeks amount of time. For MLB, it's so dragged out that like you feel like you're yearning for moves. Like it seems like each and every single week.
Absolutely. Like we met at the winter meetings, right? And there was a couple of moves there. It was great, but then they start to trickle in January and February because we do have this long off season and then the marathon of the season. Right. Guys wait for the market to develop, right? I think a lot of free agents were waiting for Shohei Ohtani to kind of set the market, and then the dominoes start to fall because they say, well, if he got $700 million, my market just went up, right? Jung-Hoo Lee just signed with the San Francisco Giants. Would he have gotten 6 years, $113 million if it weren't for Shohei getting $700 million? Who knows? Maybe he still would have gotten it, but it certainly helped him. So I think the Shohei signing was the start, the official start of free agency.
Yeah, I completely agree. And boy, did he set the market, as you mentioned, the $700 million. And, I don't know about you. I did not expect that type of number. Now, especially when all the deferral stuff started to trickle out of, him only getting paid $680 million through the first 10 years and becoming sort of the new Bobby Bonilla. But were you surprised by the $700 million number when it was first announced?
Yeah, I was definitely surprised. I did think he would get over 500 million towards the 600 million mark. So to see the 7 in front of 2 zeros and then a bunch of other zeros was certainly big. I remember I was walking my dog, get the alert, and I dropped the leash, right? Just in shock, right? But I wasn't so surprised when I found out how they were paying him, right? That $700 million seems to be, of course, parceled over 20 years, not really 10. So then it started to make a lot more sense. And we have Walker Buehler come on our show every week, right? His new teammate. And he predicted that Shohei would get $35 million as a pitcher, $35 million as a hitter. And he was completely spot on, right? That ends up being $70 million. So after doing a ton of research, I came to the realization that $700 million is a ton. It's way more than anybody else, but it's not out of the realm of what I thought was possible.
Right. That makes sense. And especially if you think about it, if he didn't have the Tommy John surgery, coming up, we could be seeing $1 billion contract.
Maybe not 1 billion, but more than 700. I mean, 1 billion. Imagine that just on the ticker on ESPN Baseball Tonight, whatever you see in 10 years, 1 billion. I mean, unbelievable.
But it makes me think, especially with like the deferred money, when Shohei does start getting paid, 68 million around that 2034 range. I mean, especially if we're talking about $7 million for one player. Be curious to see if we see $100 million for one player by that 2034 timeframe.
You never know, right? We're talking about inflation here. And Alex Rodriguez, when he signed the contract with the Rangers, it was double the amount of the previous high. The previous high contract was $126 million. He signed for $252, exactly double, right? Mike Trout, $426 million and a half. then it just keeps climbing as the TV deals get bigger. Inflation in general, right? The dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. So I totally agree with you. By the time he starts getting paid that $68 million a year, that might be the going rate for a number 2 starter. We don't know, right? You could say that you think that, oh no, that's way overblown. We've seen it go up 500 million in the last 20 years, right? What is it going to be in the next 10? We have no idea.
Yeah, I'm curious, especially, this next offseason, after this year, we got Juan Soto, we got, Walker Buehler's a free agent as well, tons of different guys who get paid big money. But, especially with the deferral stuff, this isn't the first time we've obviously heard about it. Bobby Bonilla, also Juan Soto with the Nationals, as well as Bryce Harper, they were talked about having deferrals until they were like 80 years old or something like that. But especially with how sort of absurd this sort of setup of Ohtani's deal is, like, do you think MLB needs to intervene during the next CBA to sort of put more stipulations on this deferral process? Because I got to be honest, it's pretty crazy thinking about that the Dodgers essentially paying Ohtani $700 million, still being able to get a Yamamoto or like a Josh Hader and really be able to not have it affect their luxury tax or their competitive balance tax.
I think it's important to realize that I think Shohei is a one-off. Because if you think about a lot of players, for example, Seth Lugo signed a 3 or $45 million deal. He doesn't want to defer a penny, not because he doesn't want to help the Royals, but because he needs that salary. Now, it's still a lot. You could say $15 million is a lot, but these are professional baseball players. There's tons of money involved. So we can't compare them to you and I, our day jobs, right? We just can't compare. But the deferral process, so Shohei Ohtani is getting paid $2 million a year for the next 10 years. But you have to pretend he's making $46 million a year. And the reason I say that is the tax hit that the Dodgers are getting because of signing Shohei Ohtani. It's not $2 million against the cap. That's what just Shohei's camp has decided it's worth it because he makes $50 million a year in endorsements off the field. So he wanted to do the lowest possible so the Dodgers could get the lowest possible tax hit. But let's not pretend that the tax hit is only $2 million. It's still 46. So in everyone's mind, pretend he signed a 12-year deal and he's making $46 million a year. That's what, or a 20-year deal at $46 million a year. That's what it looks like to MLB, right? So you can say, well, the Dodgers can keep making more moves. Realistically, even if they had to do $70 million against cap, they'd probably still make more moves. That's the thing about Major League Baseball. There is no cap. There's a soft cap because they have to pay a ton in taxes, but an angry Dodgers team that just got swept by the Diamondbacks is going to spend way above that. But at the same time, I'm hearing so much discourse on social media about how baseball stinks now. The best teams are just going to spend the most money and win all the championships. Are we kidding, people? Are we kidding? Did we just see the Arizona Diamondbacks in the World Series? Have we seen the San Francisco Giants in those every even year, or was it odd? I don't know, but it was every other year that they were in the World Series. The Royals made it in back-to-back years. The Astros, how did they make it? It wasn't by spending the most money. It was by developing that farm system. In Major League Baseball, you cannot buy championships. You can buy regular season wins, right? Dodgers might win 120 next year. But in a 7-game series, anything can happen. That's why baseball is so beautiful. So all those people are saying, I'm not going to watch next year if they get Ohtani and Glass now. Stop. Yeah. Of course you're going to. And the reason you're going to is because if I ask you a question, if let's say the Dodgers get Yamamoto, Glasnow, and Ohtani, and I gave you a bet, would you take the Dodgers to win the World Series or the field? And the field means the 29 other teams. You'd still take the field because we know that no matter if you have all the best players, you still don't win. Ask the Mets how spending all that money worked for them. True. Ask the Yankees how spending all that money has worked out for them. They haven't won a World Series in 2009, right? Everyone take a deep breath. Realize it's the sport we play. There's a reason we don't have a cap is because you cannot buy championships no matter how many good players you have.
I think with the Dodgers, too, it's a great example with them winning 114 games, what was it, 2 years ago, and getting knocked out in the NLDS. Like that's sort of, I mean, the trend that they're going on. And, you obviously saw the memes like throughout after the Ohtani signing, people saying, Dodgers end up losing to an 84-win team, in the NLCS or whatever. One team that, you brought up the Diamondbacks as a great example. I think it's interesting to see, especially, my favorite team, the Red Sox, winning just a few games less than a team who ended up ultimately making it to the World Series. But, the Rangers are an interesting example of like the team who did spend, the billion, the $500 million on Seager and Simeon. Obviously, those guys played a massive factor. But then you also think about a DeGrom, the $35 million each year that they spent on him, and he didn't even play. So I think obviously that balance of spending that type of money while also surrounding them with the controllable players through your farm system is definitely the best route to go about it. But yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting to see, especially the outpour of some mixed feelings over the $700 million and, the Dodgers being the big kahuna. But I got to be honest with you, it does feel like they're just like picking free agents like it's a freaking McDonald's menu or something like that.
We also have to realize, as we sit here today, they've only got no Ohtani, right? Yeah. And Ohtani's not going to pitch next year. So they still need to add pitching. They can still trade for him, right? But so could every other team.
Right.
Shohei went to the Giants. Farhan Zaidi came out. That deal was on the table for the Giants. But Shohei picked the Dodgers, right? The Dodgers gave him a better position to win. Now, will they win? I don't know. They're probably going to be the favorites. But how often does the favorite going into the year win?
Yeah.
You know where the Rangers were? Not the favorite. Diamondbacks? Not the favorite. Anything can happen in Major League Baseball. So it's going to be crazy. They're going to get all these players. Let's see them do it, right? A team like the Diamondbacks can still beat them. They aren't afraid.
Yeah.
And the Dodgers, all that they're going to have, they will have all the best players. They're going to have a target on their back all season long.
Very true.
See how that works.
And as a betting guy, I thought you'd find this interesting. The Diamondbacks opening World Series winner odds were plus 18,000. And so, when they ended up ultimately going to the World Series, I had that post ready on DraftKings. And I was even surprised myself how high the odds are. So it's always crazy to see how they shift throughout the season. And obviously with the 162, like it's such a roller coaster of like what could ultimately happen at the end of the year. But, going through this next part of the offseason after Ohtani, there's still a lot of great free agents that are still out there, but it's a pretty massive drop off, especially after Yamamoto. But I wanted to take some time to sort of, predict where some of these guys will not only sign, but the contracts that they might make. So starting off with Yamamoto, obviously throughout this past week or so, Yankees, Mets, Red Sox have all met with him. Blue Jays are also in there as well. I'm curious where you're sort of feeling that, he might sign in the amount of money that you're thinking.
So the amount of money on him keeps increasing by the day. And the reason is he is not a secret anymore. Teams have fully recognized the level of talent that he is. Evaluators consistently go over to Japan, and it's all glowing reviews. I heard Jeff Passan talk about it. And we've seen people talk about it. It's all, this guy is the absolute real deal. So think about it. A guy with pedigree, he's 25 years old, with no real injury history, who can become a top 10 pitcher in Major League Baseball the minute he steps foot on whatever team. What would you pay that guy in the open market? Well, we just saw a 30-year-old Aaron Nola get 7 years, $172 million. We saw a couple of years ago Garrett Cole, around the same age, a little bit younger, but not as young as Yamamoto, 9 years, $300 million, or whatever that contract was. So I would not be surprised to see Yamamoto sign a 10-year contract in the $300 million range. Don't be surprised when you see an enormous figure for Yamamoto. Now, in terms of the team, it's clear that Yamamoto has an affinity for the spotlight. That's probably a quote that you've heard. So we've started to narrow down the choices. Where does that make sense? Well, the Dodgers certainly make sense. Tons of spotlight. Ohtani just went over, and now Ohtani's going to meet with Yamamoto in their camp. That's scary for other teams. But Steve Cohen has a ton of money. So maybe he just says, whatever offer they're going to give you, I'll add $50 million on it. That could just be the deal, right? Yeah. Senga is in that rotation. There's another Japanese player there, still New York. And then the Yankees. You want to team up with Juan Soto? Do you want to see what we're doing there? So, unfortunately, I would put the Red Sox in fourth. However, I would put them up over the Blue Jays, right? Because I think the spotlight in Fenway is a little bit brighter than the spotlight in Toronto. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that Toronto is not a spotlight. Toronto is up there. It's the Boston Red Sox. It just, that name holds a little bit more weight. So I would say those are the front four. However, I do think it will be between the Dodgers and the Mets, because I think the Dodgers are going to have the best case Steve Cohen will have the most money. And I think it's just going to be a debate between those two because I think the Yankees and the Red Sox are going to come in at the same price as the Dodgers. Dodgers will have a better sell. And what's going to tip the scales is the money at Steve Cohen. So I would say the final two, in my opinion, would be the Dodgers and the Mets. And it's whoever gives the best pitch. And I think it's going to be over $300 million.
Yeah, me too. I think it would be over the 300 million. I'm choosing the Mets mainly because you brought up the Cohen aspect. He's also talked about how he enjoys the New York markets. Also came out today that he's focusing more on where he wants to play rather than the amount of money that he's making. So who knows how that could play a factor in terms of Cohen ultimately putting up the amount of money. But then there's also the factor as well that Cohen actually flew to Japan and met with him. I haven't really heard a lot of other teams have done that, but I think the Ohtani meeting with him as well definitely plays a factor. One other thing that I want to point out with the Red Sox, Masataka Yoshida, also good friends with Yamamoto. So 100%. I'm very curious to see how the Japanese players sort of play into factor of not only where he wants to play in terms of the spotlight, but the comfortability aspect of being able to transition from Japan over to the United States.
That's why I think the Red Sox and the Yankees are much closer than Yankee fans want to admit, because the Red Sox have a leg up. Right? The Yankees might offer him a little bit more money than the Red Sox do, bigger budget, but the Red Sox have an edge. So, and they still have the spotlight. They are still the Boston Red Sox. But I think something that hurts the Red Sox chances is their record last season, because I think he wants to join a winner. Not to say that the Red Sox can't be a winner last year. How many times did the Red Sox finish last, then went on to go to the World Series? Like, it seems like that's just their MO. They're like, all right, we'll have one bad year and then we'll have an amazing year.
It's not good the Red for Sox my mental health.
I know it's tough, but the Red Sox can easily do that.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's hurting him. And that's what's hurting the Yankees too, and the Mets, right?
Yep.
So that's why ultimately it's hard for me to say he's going anywhere but except the Dodgers. But Steve Cohen with Senga, right? It's the same thing as Yoshida, even though I think Yoshida and Yamamoto are closer than Senga is to Yamamoto. But it's still, if Cohen says we'll give you 50 more million, money talks.
Yeah, and also, we haven't really played in the factor of how much, maybe Tanaka talked to Yamamoto about the Yankees as well. I think that plays
Matsui as well.
1,000%. I think that definitely plays a factor. But the Red Sox also came out and said that they won't join a bidding war with the Mets and Yankees. But just so many different factors on what ultimately could happen. But I think the other top free agent, Blake Snell, obviously just won the NL Cy Young. Curious to see sort of the amount of money that he's going to command. Obviously we saw a little bit of lack of the bulk amount of innings that he's been able to present over the last few years or so. But, for me, I'm thinking, Mariners, hometown team, they just freed up all that amount of money with the Suarez trade, obviously with the Kelenic trade as well, Marco Gonzalez. But, I think he's going to make 215 over 6 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, and I could see it happening. I actually think he's going to be the Boston Red Sox. I think that's where Snell goes, because I do think that Yamamoto will not become a Red Sox, but I think the Red Sox are still in. They have a ton of money. They need a starter, right? And I think every team is different. The Red Sox, I think, have an ability to gamble on a guy like Snell. And the reason I say ability to gamble is because Blake Snell has had bad years, and he's had years where he's the Cy Young Award winner, right? He's a 2-time Cy Young Award winner, but he's also had those years where he's got a 4 ERA, and you're like, what the hell happened? And he's not an innings eater. But what the Red Sox have that a lot of other teams don't is they have more depth than I think a lot of people want to give the Red Sox credit for. Cutter Crawford established himself last year, right? Tanner Houck can be a starter. And that's not even mentioning like Nick Pivetta taking that next leap, right? You have a lot of guys that can eat innings so that you can gamble on a guy like Blake Snell. So I think the Red Sox miss out on Yamamoto, and then that's their big fish. The reason that I'm still questioning the Mariners is, yes, hometown kid makes a lot of sense, but Kevin Durant was also a hometown kid with the Washington Wizards. And I'm not trying to compare the Mariners to the Wizards. The Mariners are much better. What the Mariners have is they have tons and tons of pitching, right? They have more than the Red Sox. They have more than the Yankees. They have more than a lot of teams. Now, will they trade some of that pitching in order to get bats and then sign Blake Snell? Could easily happen, right? We just haven't seen that yet. But a team that has Luis Castillo, and you have all these young pitchers, and you have Logan Gilbert, and you have so many guys.
Robbie Ray
is pitching where you want to spend your money. Or would you rather spend it on bats? They could trade those pitchers and sign Snell, and then we're having a different discussion. That's why I think the Red Sox are the team actually to get Blake Snell.
I think the Mets also play a factor as well. I saw something that, if they don't get Yamamoto, then they'll, shift their attention over to Snell. But I think that's very interesting. Obviously Snell had a lot of experience playing at Fenway and playing against the Red Sox when he was with the Rays throughout the start of his career. But, I think as well, the next tier down, Jordan Montgomery, he's a guy that I think honestly is a lock to go to Boston. He's actually over the winter been staying in Boston. His wife is taking classes at BU. Obviously the Red Sox, as you mentioned, need a starter, and Montgomery really showed how effective and consistent he can be throughout the playoffs with Texas. And, I'm tabbing him 5 years, 125 million. I think 25 a year is fair for a guy like Jordan Montgomery.
More than fair. I think you broke it down perfectly, right? I think they will get one of the big time starters. Yep. Who it is, I don't know. We're all making guesses. I think that makes the most sense. I don't really have anything to add. That contract sounds, I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and then in terms of obviously hitters, it's a little bit of a scarce sort of market out there. But Cody Bellinger at the top, big rebound year this past year with the Cubs. But we've been hearing the number of $200 to $250 million. He's trying to show teams that he's back in that MVP type caliber sort of form. But it's interesting with his hard rate percentage, career low 31.4%. And I'm curious to sort of see how much confidence teams have that, he'll be able to put the sort of performance they did with the Cubs last year in a consistent, sort of time frame and worth the $20 to $25 million. But I'm thinking he could maybe get like a Chris Bryant type contract. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's very likely. I think everyone's worried about, what Cody Bellinger will become. And what I say is, all right, let's say he never puts up a type of season that he did last year, almost winning the MVP. Still a center fielder who can play first base, be dynamic. And let's say his numbers come down a little bit, right? Let's say he doesn't hit 300. Let's say he hits 280, 275, right? If it's not over 30 home runs, say it's 25, right? Still stealing bags, driving in runs, playing great defense in center field. We just saw what Jung Hoo Lee got. So even that is being priced into the market at 200 to 250 million. That's what I think people don't really understand, is that teams are not going to pay him $225 million because they think that he is that player that he was last year. They are giving him $225 million, probably assuming his numbers come down, but he's still worth that because of the market. I think, and myself included, all of us, we undervalue contracts every time. We thought Jung Hoo Lee would get 75 to 80 million. It's honestly, think of the deal that you think it's going to be, add 50 million. That's just the market now. It's just way more than we thought. So when you see a Cody Bellinger contract come in for 225 million, don't think that that's the going rate for what his year was last year. That's the going rate for a decrease in numbers and still Cody Bellinger. That's what it is, right? And Cody Bellinger is a very marketable player, very popular with young people, right? Really fun, good personality. The jerseys are going to fly off the shelves. I think he's either going to be a Blue Jay. They need outfield, right? They're probably going to lose Kevin Kiermaier. They have Varsho, they have Springer, and not much else, right? I think Luke's is their starting left fielder as of right now. So I think that's a great fit, right? They've been in on everybody. That makes the most sense. Or the Cubs, just bring him back, right? Could easily see that as well. I think those are the two teams at the forefront of the Bellinger sweepstakes.
Yeah, and we actually saw Bellinger's wife, put a picture out on our story of being in Toronto. So I think that definitely plays factor in a little bit. And I think, the heavy favorite going into the year was the Yankees. But, obviously now Verdugo and Soto kind of takes him out of the conversation. But yeah, I'm very curious to see sort of the market that he'll demand, and, also sort of how he's able to obviously bounce back, continue to show that he is back in that MVP form. Because I don't know about you, it's kind of tough to see a guy, in 2019 be so good and then, dip off as much as he did.
100%. It's weird. Just, COVID happened, guys get hurt. They just don't open up that potential. And then once they're fully healthy, you see who they really are. We got to remember, these guys are people, right? They have stuff going on off the field, right? There's plenty of players that I've, found out about. It's like, oh yeah, he didn't have a bad season because he's bad. There was stuff off the field that, shouldn't be reported and should be held close to the chest, but puts things in perspective. And that's why I think Cody Bellinger, I think he's a great player. I think he deserves a ton of money. Do I think he's the player he was last year? Probably not, but a lot of people thought that about Dansby, right? Dansby signed a big deal. Everyone's like, oh, he's going to regress. Very, very good, right? So we never know. right? We can make our projections based on looking at hard hit rates and say, oh, yeah, he's going to regress. We don't really know. We can make a guess. We can make an educated guess. We don't know.
Yeah, I agree. The numbers don't always paint the full picture, and I think that's a great point. You never know what's going on, on the behind the scenes. And real quick, I want to shout out one of the shows that Just Baseball Media has that I think is awesome. I've connected with some of the guys over there. Is Behind the Scenes. You guys they do a great job of uncovering the mental side of the game. I try to do that a little bit on this show, but like obviously also talk about the wide range of sports stuff and the deeper aspects. But I think that's something that people forget a lot about. And also I feel like the mental side sometimes can play a big factor into the amount of money that you can get in some of the contracts, and your mental toughness, your ability to have a routine, and ultimately not allow the pressure, as we've seen sometimes happen in an LA, in a Boston, in a New York, sort of like decrease your ability to be able to play and perform well on the field.
100%. People want to pay for the person on top of what they can provide on the field, right? Shohei Ohtani got $700 million, not just because he can hit and pitch and is the greatest athlete we've ever seen play baseball, but because he's one of the most global marketable athletes that we've seen, right? So there's a lot more that goes into a contract than just the numbers on the field. Like I said, if Cody Bellinger goes to Toronto, they're going to make tens of millions of dollars off jersey sales immediately. Brand deals. Bellinger, big time player, right? So it's beyond just he hit this many home runs, he accumulated this many amount of WAR. This is what he's worth. It's much more than just that.
I agree. And, throughout this offseason so far, I think it's been, relatively what most people expected, especially with, obviously Ohtani going to the heavy favorite of the Dodgers, and, not a ton of surprises in terms of Soto going to New York. But I'm curious from your vantage point, is there anything that surprised you so far this MLB offseason?
Nothing has surprised me. And I think I stopped being surprised when Jameson Taillon and Taijuan Walker got 70 to 80 million. And then I kind of realized, wait a minute, I am reading this market wrong. So is it shocking to see a $700 million deal? Of course it is. But then you start to realize, like, it's not as shocking as you think it is, right? When you look at the rest of the market. So no, nothing. And I know this is probably is not the answer that everybody wants, because it's like, oh yeah, this was a shocker. Like, this was crazy. No, like 700 million is a lot. I could see how they got there. I could see why Nola got the money that he did. I could see why some of these players have been traded. I could see why Soto got traded to the Yankees. That makes sense. So nothing has surprised me so far. And Yamamoto was going to surprise me, right? I thought it might be 200 million. The more I'm thinking about it, now he's going to get 300 million. And that's just put that in the back of your brain. And then when he gets 350, I'll be like, yeah, I was even under exaggerating it. Like, it just, nothing really surprises me anymore.
Yeah, the two things I would say that have surprised me so far is just, two teams that have been like more active than I expected and less active than I expected. In terms of the Baltimore Orioles, AL East division winner, they over the last 2 years, it's pretty surprising. They haven't really like done anything like really at all, other than really Jack Flaherty at the trade deadline. And they just utilize the amount of guys that's coming up through their system, which ultimately makes sense. But I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen them put a little bit more emphasis on adding to this team, especially the pitching staff, and especially with Mike Elias over the last 2 years saying that they're going to put the money behind this team, and then ultimately really hasn't done too much. And then also as well with the Braves, obviously star-studded offense, and their ability to be one of the best teams throughout this season. Obviously got knocked out early on in the playoffs earlier than most people expected, but they've been a little bit more active than I expected them to be. Obviously with Dylan Cease, Shohei Ohtani was rumored a little bit, the Jarred Kelenic trade, Ronaldo Lopez, just different stuff like that. Didn't really expect them to be as active as they have been.
It's so funny. I wasn't surprised by any of that. And the reason I wasn't surprised by the Orioles is this is who the Orioles are. This is how they operate. They operate through this lens of, we're going to build through the farm system. We're not going to spend that much money. We're not an enormous market. So it never surprises me when the Orioles fall flat in terms of signing free agents. It's like, this is their MO. This is what they do. And by gaining this amount of success, what that then tells Mike Elias and their front office is, this way works. So it only reinforces that point of what they're doing is the correct way to do things. On the Braves side, The Braves, I'm not surprised that they're operating in the trade market and that they're being very strategic. That's how the Braves have become the Braves, right? Signing Acuna early, Ozzy Albies early, Michael Harris early, all of these guys, early deals, early extensions. So it's not surprising that they go to get a guy like Jared Kelenic, right? Let's say he has a good year. They're going to sign him to a big time deal. Now, it might be 10 years, 100, right? They're going to be like, all right, we believe in you now, but do you want to keep going? Do you want to leave $100 million on the table, right? You haven't proven much.
Kind of like an Aaron Hicks deal.
Exactly. Like, that's what I feel like the Braves are operating under their MO. They've been consistent. They want to get the good young players. They want to build you, and then they want to pay you immediately. The Orioles, they don't want to pay anybody. They just want to build this rich farm system, see other guys compete, and not spend that much money. So that's why I'm not surprised really by anybody, because once you learn, and I'm not saying you don't. I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying that the more I learn about these teams is the more I'm realizing they are actually doing exactly what they've been doing their entire existence.
Yeah, and I guess it makes it a little bit easier to sort of guess on what they're going to do, but that definitely helps out other teams sort of try and guess as well, and game plan and strategize. But just to wrap things up, I'm curious with a few more months until spring training begins. What's one bold prediction that you think will happen this offseason?
One bold prediction. I think that a lot of these guys who we've heard on the trade market are all going to get dealt. And what I mean by that is there's always talk of guys in trades and that never kind of happen. I think this is the year where it really does happen. I think Cease gets traded. I think Burns gets traded. I think Glasnow gets traded. I think Randy Arozarena gets traded. I think Isaac Paredes gets traded. Like, we don't normally see off seasons where it's like big time players. Like, we might see one, maybe two, not five. That's my bold prediction, is a lot of these guys who have been rumored where an normal offseason is just a rumor and never actually happens. That's my bold prediction. And it may not seem bold because it's like, well, they're already in the rumor mill. A lot of them never happen. I think this is the year where all of those guys are on different teams.
Yeah, I mean, especially like Corbin Burns, I think he will ultimately get dealt. Obviously, like the Brewers walked it back a little bit. And he could definitely, they could wait until the trade deadline and still get relatively similar since he has 2 more years on his contract. But I agree. I think all those guys will ultimately get dealt. Won't be surprised. This isn't like a bold prediction, but Randy Arozarena and Tyler Glasnow going to the Dodgers. Obviously, we all saw the Ohtani or the Randy Arozarena picture of him and Ohtani with like the eyes and everything like that sort of Instagram post. But, I'm going to, go along the lines of the bold prediction. And I'm going to say that whether it happens this offseason or whether it happens at the trade deadline, I think Mike Trout is going to see the amount of success that Shohei Ohtani is having in LA, and he'll ultimately ask for a trade, whether it is this offseason or whether it is at the trade deadline.
Could totally see that. I think that's something that I think all baseball fans have been hoping for. Get Mike Trout. And I think a perfect team for Mike Trout to go to is the Phillies. Yeah. Phillies fan, Eagles fan. They don't really have a center fielder, and they have the prospects in order to do it. I think that's the perfect team that should go get Mike Trout, come to Philly, team up with Bryce Harper, and let's go beat those Dodgers.
God, think about that NLCS, bro.
That's a narrative. And then, of course, you still got the Braves in there. Like, people say, oh, the Dodgers are going to steal anything. Let the offseason unfold, ladies and gentlemen. Let them. And the reason I think a lot of these guys are going to get traded, these teams, these big market teams, they're desperate. Yankees won 82 games last year. The Red Sox won 78 games. The Mets crashed and burned. There's a lot of teams. The Giants, they want to spend money. The Astros, are they just going to let everyone else do everything? There's a lot of teams that are now saying we have to make the moves now. And there's a lot of big time teams. So this season, the way it unfolded makes me think that this offseason is going to be historic.
Yeah, I mean, the Astros have been very, honestly, surprisingly quiet. They're one team that we haven't really heard anything about, but they always seem to be there.
Makes me think they're cooking something.
They're almost too
quiet.
I agree. But yeah, I think Trout against Ohtani in an NLCS, if we're able to replicate what we saw in the championship of the WBC, in 2 years, Ohtani's on the mound facing Mike Trout to ultimately advance to the World Series. Oh my God, that is prime time baseball right there.
Prime time baseball. So My last point, everyone mad about the Dodgers. Let the offseason unfold. Let's see them win it. Let's see it, right? Let's see it.
I would love to see some AL teams get involved as well. Obviously, we've seen the Red Sox and Yankees, but it seems like we brought up the Dodgers, the Mets, the Giants, all these NL teams, the Phillies. I think the NL side is going to be the big kahuna, and then whoever comes out of the AL is able to get past Rangers or the Astros are ultimately going to find their way to the end.
No doubt about it. Couldn't agree with you more.
But really appreciate you coming on, Peter, and thanks for taking the time, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Peter and got a little bit more of the down low on what's happened so far this MLB offseason. And it also helped you think a little bit about on what could happen prior to the season. But I want to hear from you. Let me know down in the comments or tweet at me at Jake Iggy on what has been the most surprising moves that you've seen so far this MLB offseason. For me, I honestly did not expect Juan Soto to go to the Yankees with all the different rumors that were swirling around. I didn't expect it. And I also didn't really expect how active some of these different teams have been, like the Braves as well as the Cardinals. But I'm so excited to see how this MLB offseason continues to materialize. And I'm going to have much more people on this podcast speaking and reacting to different moves that happened prior to the season, as well as some different people previewing some different teams before the MLB season starts. A lot on this podcast, I do connecting mental health and sports, which is something that I love to do, and also showing the deeper aspect of sports. But I love also talking about just sports in general, and especially my favorite sport, baseball. So that's more content that I want to put more into this podcast. And, I hope you're excited to see more of that content as well. But if you want to be updated on when episodes drop, make sure to subscribe over on YouTube or whatever audio platform that you're listening to right now. And also make sure to follow Iggy Sports Talk over on Instagram. It's at Iggy Sports Talk. But as always, greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. And I'll see you and talk to you next time. Peace.